Okay, now we go through the 2012 JC1 promo exam. This is from NYJC, so this is exactly last year's promotional exams, the CSQ question. Okay, now for CSQ, since you have already done the time practice, you should realize that time-wise it is much more comfortable than in an essay question. You have 1 hour and 15 minutes, and my suggestion actually here is that you spend 15 minutes to read the extracts and make sure you have a very clear idea of what the extracts are talking about, because understanding the extracts is actually very important for CSQ. Okay, once you have spent 15 minutes reading the extracts, you have about an hour, which gives you about 2 minutes per mark. Okay, which actually is still very comfortable compared to essay. Okay, because essay you only have 1.8 minutes per mark. Okay, so please make sure that you can complete your case study in time. Okay. Okay, now before we start on the questions proper, I like to spend some time to run through with you the extracts and the information in the extracts. So hopefully they will help you in interpreting extracts later on in your exams. Okay, so table 1, usually we will start off with some kind of a data, okay, whether it is presented in a chart form or numerical form. Okay, you need to realize that for example, in this set, in table 1, we have GDP growth rate, inflation rate, and unemployment rate. Now I just want to emphasize the point that in all cases, when you see GDP growth rate and it does not state whether it is real or nominal, it is safer to assume that it is actually real GDP growth. Okay, the reason is because it is a convention that sources like IMF, World Bank, and other newspapers to quote real GDP figures and not nominal GDP figures. Okay, so because of that, if it's not stated, assume that it is real GDP growth. Okay, so clearly the first three indicators are actually macro indicators, alright, and we usually use them for our macro topics and also for material standard of living. Okay, and the last three, things like life expectancy, Gini coefficient, health expenditure, these tend to be related to non-material standard of living, okay, or even economic development. Okay, so you must have a clear idea of how do we usually use all these indicators. Okay, now next extract is actually talking about unemployment. Now I want to make this very clear, and I think this is repeated time and again, for macro problems like unemployment and also things like economic growth and inflation, we usually are concerned with three things: the causes, the effects, and the solutions. Okay, generally each extract will cover one or more of these three aspects of macroeconomic problems. Okay, so in this case, let's look at what extract 1 says and see whether it talks about causes, effects, or solutions. Vietnam's unemployment rate has increased. Okay, and if you read it in detail, why has the unemployment rate increased? There are a few hints. Okay, basically things like there is a shortage of orders. Okay, firms are trying to scale down production. Why? Because of economic downturn. And finally, because there is very weak demand. Now this should give you a very clear idea what is the causes of unemployment in Vietnam. Okay, terms like weak demand, shortage of orders, economic downturn, these are related to your cyclical unemployment. Okay, so when you see these terms at the back of your mind, you must think of cyclical unemployment. Okay, now what else? So what else are there? If you continue reading, you realize that some workers are made redundant. Redundant in this case means they are sacked or retrenched. Basically, they lose their job. So they are made redundant because of a transit from labor-intensive to capital-intensive industries. Okay, so this is economic restructuring. Restructuring from labor-intensive to capital-intensive. And generally, we believe that when these things happen, you will get structural unemployment. Okay, this is how you draw hints from the extracts. Hopefully, you are reasonably skilled in this by now. Okay. Okay, and again, causes, effects, solutions. In extract 2, we try to look for the same things. And if you look at it, it is quite clear that extract 2 is about environmental damage. Okay, so you catch terms like polluting air and water, serious environmental challenges. So this clearly is talking about the cost of development or economic growth. Okay, so therefore it is a negative effect of economic growth. Okay. Extract 3, it's quite a lengthy extract. So let's see what they are talking about. Okay, so first and foremost, realize that for the first 2 extracts we were talking about Vietnam, but in this case now we are talking about China. Okay, so be very clear. Okay, so they are saying some very interesting things about China, and basically what is happening here is that there is wage inflation in China. Okay, and what causes this wage inflation? Minimum wages, labor shortages, rising standards of education, and also increasing labor productivity. Okay, these are the various reasons why there is wage inflation in China. Now, the other interesting thing is that the labor productivity has led to some quite interesting changes in the Chinese economy, right? So this labor productivity, according to the extract, is due to technological progress. It is due to increased capital investment and human capital investment. Okay, and what are the effects of the labor? What are the effects of the increase in labor productivity? Basically, it has led to structural changes, and this structural changes is mainly from cheap, low value added goods to cheap, high value added goods. Okay, some of the good things also is that because of the higher productivity, there is higher foreign direct investment in China. Okay, but of course, this point about structural changes implies that there is some kind of structural unemployment that comes as a result of the increased labor productivity. Okay, so this is the quick discussion of the important parts of the extracts in this CSQ. So without further ado, we will move on to the questions, and at the same time I will still keep referring to these extracts. Okay, now first question, when they are asked to compare the trends between the GPL for Vietnam and China over this given period, and it is 2 marks. So again, in terms of skills, when you are asked to compare, we expect you to give 1 difference and 1 similarity, since it is just 2 marks. Okay, now a few things that you need to take note, and that is the reason why this question is actually quite tricky. Now, the question asks for general price level. Okay, in the extract you are given inflation rate. Okay, so you have to take note of the differences. They ask for GPL, but the data is on inflation rate. What is important then is that you need to realize that inflation rate is actually the rate of increase in your GPL. Okay, which means that as long as my inflation rate stays positive, my GPL is actually increasing. Okay, I say that again. As long as my inflation rate is positive, my GPL will be increasing. So in this case, I'm not looking at the first point and the last point and conclude that it is an upward trend. Okay, for a very simple reason, the data given is for inflation rate, but you are asked about general price level. Okay? But it is quite clear to you, it should be quite clear to you that at the very least you can identify that GPL for both countries are increasing. Okay, because for most of the period there is actually a positive inflation rate. Okay, so this is your similarity. So then what are the differences? There are a few differences that you can talk about, and the first difference is that the GPL in Vietnam is increasing much faster than in China. How do you see? The inflation rates are consistently higher. Okay, the inflation rates are consistently higher in Vietnam compared to in China. Okay, the other thing is that you can say that there is a dip in 2009 in China, in which case you have a negative inflation rate of 0.7, which means that GPL actually fell in 2009 in China. So moving on, what are the possible consequences of high inflation rate in a country? Okay, so you are asked for consequences. Essentially, consequences are similar to effects, right? So basically, you are being asked to list out or to explain what are the consequences or what are the effects of high inflation in a country. Okay, if I'm not wrong, in your lecture book, there is actually a whole list of effects on inflation, and hopefully by now you have revised all the different effects of inflation. Okay, for this question, the key thing that I want to talk about actually is that you should find most of the effects from the extracts. Okay, if you can find an effect that is mentioned in the extracts, you should talk about that effect in this answer. Okay, but if you cannot, you must use your own contextual knowledge. Okay, that is like the second option. Okay. Okay, and let me just say again, in lecture booklet page 99, you can find a whole list of effects on inflation. Okay, so I will just talk about two effects on inflation. Firstly, something that I can find from extract 3. Extract 3 mentioned that there is serious wage inflation in China. Okay, this is a case whereby inflation has a negative effect on the production of an economy. What's happening here basically is that the input prices are rising faster than output prices, which naturally means that firms are making less profits and therefore they cut production. Okay, and when they cut production, your real national income falls. Is that alright? So effect on production of the economy, this is one of the effects of high inflation and is mentioned in the extracts. Okay. Now, the problem is that other than this point, there isn't much in the extracts that cover the consequences of inflation. Okay, and if that's the case, you have to use your contextual knowledge, and in this case, I can choose to talk about its effect on investments. Okay, and the point here is that high inflation actually leads to uncertainty in the economy. And when there is uncertainty in the economy, businessmen are afraid to invest, which then means that your investment or your I will fall. Okay. Again, I falls leads to real national income falling through a decrease in AD. Okay, so 2 points each, well explained, it should give you 4 marks. Of course, you can choose to talk about a variety of other issues like redistribution of income, and that's fine as long as they are well explained.